I could feel myself quickly being enveloped by the comfort of the sofa. I'll rest for just 20, maybe 30 minutes, and I'll switch with Kelly. With that thought, I drifted off to sleep. Instead of just 30 minutes, I ended up sleeping for nearly an hour. This is my life right now. My body is exhausted, but I don't consider myself unhappy. Though Tom doesn't help much, he works hard. Kelly is dutiful, and Grandma is a wonderful person. I had no intention of complaining. I didn't think this lifestyle would last forever. We could all feel that Grandma's time was limited, so I wanted to focus on caregiving to avoid any regrets. Then one day Tom came home and said, "Hey, I got this from work," handing me a travel voucher. "Oh, what's this? Did you do something nice?" "I got it from my boss. It's probably his way of telling me to take a break, even though he knows I'm always busy." "But that's great. Let's go." "Yay, let's go somewhere nice," Kelly exclaimed upon hearing the conversation. When I suggested it, Tom sadly shook his head. "I can't go, but it's a shame to waste it, so you and Kelly go. You should take a break too." I was surprised to hear him say such kind words, as he had never done so before. Of course, I wanted to go on the trip, but I had concerns. "That's kind of you, but what about Grandma's care?" "I'll take care of that. I should be the one looking after Mom anyway." Kelly and I exchanged glances. Unexpectedly, I was happy that Tom had offered to help, but I was unsure if it was a good idea to leave him in charge of caregiving since he wasn't used to it. Kelly seemed to feel the same way and asked worriedly, "Hey, is Dad really okay with this? He hasn't done much caregiving before." Tom seemed a bit offended and retorted, "Don't underestimate me. I can handle it. Hey, maybe we should just cancel the trip. It would be tough if something happened. You guys are being too noisy." Suddenly, Tom started to get angry. "What's the problem? I'm trying to be nice here and you don't trust me. You think I'm unreliable." "What do you say?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. We didn't mean any harm." Seeing us frightened, Tom smiled with satisfaction. "That's right. You don't need to worry. It's just 1 night and 2 days. I'm not asking you to travel around the world." With that said, we couldn't respond. "Well then, since it's a rare opportunity, should we go?" I was somewhat uneasy about Tom's insistence on us going on the trip, but not wanting to upset him further, we decided to go. The destination was a tourist spot not too far from here, and we managed to stay at a decent inn. I was worried about Tom's mom, but Tom was no child. He should manage. If something happened, he would contact us, and there were ways to return quickly. Moreover, a cold wave had brought heavy snow, turning the surroundings into a beautiful snowy landscape. Kelly seemed to enjoy it, but being the serious girl she is, brought her study materials to the room. We strolled through the quaint snow-covered countryside town, enjoyed the pleasant hot springs, and savored delicious meals. After 2 days, we were fully refreshed and bought souvenirs for Tom and his mother before heading home. We could have gone straight to our house, but since Tom's family home was closer, I decided to deliver the souvenirs to his mother first. I had informed Tom in advance that we were heading to his family home, but upon arrival there was no sign of anyone around. It was getting dark and not a single light was on, making everything eerily quiet. Something seems off. Indeed, I wonder what happened. Be careful where you step. We tread carefully through the snow, making sure not to slip on the ice, and opened the sliding door to the family home. Inside, there was a sense that people had been there just before, but it was dark and items were scattered all over the floor. It looked as if someone had hurriedly left the place. "Mom, this is kinda scary," Kelly said. "Do you want to wait outside?" However, Kelly shook her head, so we cautiously entered the house. "Hello, it's Tabitha." I called out loudly, but no response came. We continued carefully toward the back and opened the room where Tom's mom was likely sleeping. It was chillingly cold inside, as if it wasn't even indoors. Looking further in, we saw Tom's mom wrapped in a blanket with a pale face. "This can't be happening, Mom." I rushed to her side to speak to her, but her body was ice cold. Yet there was a faint breath and she groaned in response to my call. "Kelly, call an ambulance," I shouted to Kelly, who stood frozen at the door. Looking around the room, I noticed that the window was inexplicably open. No wonder it was so cold. I hurriedly closed the window, turned on the heat, and wrapped my clothing around Tom's mom. "Mom, she'll be okay. Help is on the way." Just then, I faintly heard the sound of sirens. What? They're already here? Can't be. But as the siren sounds grew louder, they stopped right in front of the family home. Emergency responders rushed in through the entrance. "Mrs. Johnson, Dorothy Johnson, are you okay?" Hearing that, I breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, thank goodness, she's here. Please come quick." Hearing my voice, the responders came to the room immediately and began administering care to Tom's mom. "Oh, this is hypothermia. We need to transport her immediately. And you are?" "I'm Tabitha Johnson, her daughter-in-law. And who is this?" "This is my daughter Kelly." "I see. So will your daughter accompany you? Is that all right?" The paramedic seemed to be looking at me with a hint of suspicion. I suddenly had a bad feeling. "That's fine, but why?" "I'll explain that in a moment." A man in a suit entered the room and showed me a police badge. "Police? What's this about?" "We'll be transporting her now, so we'll leave the rest to you." "Mom," Kelly looked at me with a face about to cry. I was confused but tried to stay strong. "It's okay, Kelly, I'm fine. You should stay with your grandmother." Kelly nodded and then boarded the ambulance heading to the hospital. "So, Mrs. Johnson, could you please come with us to the station?" Hearing "to the station," my heart skipped a beat. I never imagined I'd hear such a line outside of a drama, especially when I hadn't done anything wrong. Wait a minute. Why is this happening? Your husband Tom made a report. He said his wife was trying to harm his mother. When we arrived, we found the situation. Hearing his explanation, I felt the ground sway beneath me. If anything happened to my mother-in-law, could I be considered a suspect? That's not true. It's a misunderstanding. "Please investigate properly," I pleaded desperately, but he responded wearily. "That's why we want you to come to the station." Without any ability to resist, I was placed in a police car. After living honestly for over 40 years, such an unforeseen event was unfolding. Wrapped in despair, I looked outside to see the snow-covered ground lit colorfully by traffic lights. Seeing children playing joyfully in the snow, I couldn't help but shed tears. The snow that seemed so delightful during our hot spring trip now felt unbearably cold. As I started thinking about the future, I suddenly became scared. I could visualize news footage of me being covered. The person you see on the screen now is the suspect, Tabby Johnson. Miss Johnson is suspected of attempting to harm her bedridden mother-in-law and was arrested yesterday evening. What would become of Kelly if that happened to me? Being branded as the criminal's daughter could ruin not only her exams but her entire future. But I am innocent. Thinking this, my heart rate suddenly increased and I felt an urge to flee right there and then. I felt like I was going insane but desperately tried to control myself. Act impulsively now would only confirm their suspicions. A thorough investigation should quickly reveal my innocence. So for now I had no choice but to comply. The police car slowly moved through the snowy roads. Finally at the police station, I was taken straight to an interrogation room. "Please explain what you were doing until now." "I was on a trip with my daughter. We returned in the evening." "Is there anyone who can verify your story?" "We stayed at an inn, so they should be able to confirm it." I tried to maintain a composed demeanor. Appearing too frantic could make me look guilty. "Was it usually your husband who took care of her?" "I have been the caregiver. My husband only took care of her these last 2 days." "Understood. We will look into that." "And what about my husband? How is he?" "Actually, he is currently missing." "Missing? Why?" Hearing that Tom was missing made me anxious. What could have possibly happened to him? "We are currently searching for him. We believe he will be found soon." "So what happens to me now?" "Unfortunately, you'll need to stay in the detention center for today." "That's outrageous. I haven't done anything. I understand, but we must consider all possibilities. You are still a suspect. If released, there's a chance you could tamper with the evidence. I felt like everything was going dark before my eyes. I was being treated like a complete criminal. Was I going to be taken to prison without even going home? In the end, I spent the day in the detention center. Naturally, I couldn't communicate with anyone outside. Was my mother-in-law okay? And what had happened to Kelly? All I could do was think about them, unable to sleep a wink. The next day, that detective came. "Mrs. Johnson, we've kept you waiting. Your innocence has been proven and you're being released." With those words, I was allowed outside. "Thank you so much. We were able to confirm with the inn where you stayed, and your daughter helped a lot too." I talked with him as we walked down the corridor. "Kelly did? Is that so?" "Yes, and from the care manager and neighbors' inquiries, we verify that you have been the caregiver all along." "Is that so? And my husband?" He hesitated before saying, "We haven't found him yet, but it's certain Tom was at the family home. Why he was left alone for so long remains unknown." Outside, Kelly and the care manager were waiting. "Kelly." "Mom, it felt like years had passed, though it was only a day. I heard from the police you worked hard to prove my innocence." Kelly nodded with tears in her eyes. "Yes, it was tough, but it's okay now. Grandma has also pulled through, but she can't be discharged for a while." Hearing that, I felt a deep sense of relief. As long as my mother-in-law was safe, that's all that mattered. We decided to go home for the time being. We got a ride home in the care manager's car and finally arrived. It seemed like Kelly had already brought the luggage from the family home. After saying goodbye to the care manager and organizing the luggage, I suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion. Really, what is he up to? It makes no sense why we went to the hot springs in the first place. I'm exhausted too. Let's take a rest. We both lay down, trying to sleep. It was just past 1 p.m. Having not slept at all the previous day, I quickly felt drowsy. Then the doorbell rang. I jumped up and checked the monitor, only to see that detective standing there. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry to come unannounced." I immediately opened the front door. "What is it?" "Well, we have a report of a suspicious person believed to be Tom, and he appears to be carrying a weapon." Carrying a weapon. Upon hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. "It's not confirmed yet, but we're taking precautions by placing officers around your house. Please avoid unnecessary outings and ensure your doors are locked." After saying that, he closed the door. I quickly explained the situation to Kelly, and we checked all the locks in the house. Fortunately, everything was secure, which gave us some relief. But with no idea when Tom might show up, I was plunged back into anxiety. Now every little noise or faint voice from outside made us jumpy. Naturally, we couldn't sleep under such circumstances, huddling together, holding our breath. "Hey Mom, it's all a mistake, right? Dad wouldn't do such a thing, right?" Of course he wouldn't, but let's be cautious. I didn't want to believe Tom could commit such an act, but we had to consider the possibility. I didn't understand what he wanted or why he framed me. I had no idea what he might do next, so we had to be careful. If that moment came, I had to ensure at least Kelly was safe. Holding her hand, I made that resolve. Time seemed to crawl by unusually slowly after that. It was when the day began to fade. I received a call on my smartphone from the police. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson, we just found Tom safe and sound at a hotel. He's currently with the police giving his statement, so please rest assured." Oh, thank goodness. "Thank you." After saying just that, I hung up the phone. Did they find Dad? It seems so. Now we can finally get some rest. Feeling relieved, we were suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue and fell asleep. We slept till noon the next day. When I woke up, Kelly had already gone to school, leaving only a note behind. In the afternoon, the police called again, revealing the whole truth. When Tom was secured at the hotel, he was with Jessica Nathaniel. I had always thought she was just Tom's subordinate, but it turned out they had been having an affair for quite some time. Pretending to work on holidays and secretly meeting up was apparently a regular occurrence. While we were away on our trip, Tom had snuck Jessica into the family home. Trying to keep it a secret from his mother, they were enjoying the night together, but Tom made a significant error. He turned off the heating in his mother's room for ventilation and even opened a window. However, he got carried away with Jessica and completely forgot about it. His mother tried to close the window but couldn't manage due to her frailty and just endured it. By the time Tom remembered, she was already cold. Thinking she had passed away, he panicked. Seeing the message about us visiting the family home, he decided to pin the blame on me. After calling an ambulance and reporting to the police, he hurriedly packed up and fled with Jessica. That's why, when we arrived, the house was in disarray and the ambulance arrived just in time. Of course, such a flimsy plan couldn't succeed, and I was quickly released. Tom was trying to find a way out of this tight spot, but to no avail. Finally, the police caught up with them, and they both got arrested. The report of a suspicious person with a weapon turned out to be someone else, who in fact had no weapon. It was a troubling story, but I was truly relieved that we were safe. However, after hearing everything, I was deeply furious with Tom. Not for shirking the caregiving or having an affair, although those were unforgivable too. What I couldn't forgive was the danger he put his own mother in. I couldn't imagine living with someone who treated their own mother so carelessly. So I sought a lawyer and proceeded with the divorce. Since Tom and Jessica were arrested for criminal negligence resulting in death, the divorce proceedings went smoothly. I successfully divorced and claimed substantial compensation. Jessica's parents apologized and covered the compensation. In addition to the property division, I made sure Tom paid the remaining child support for Kelly's college expenses. Though the sentence for both was somewhat reduced since his mother survived, they still received suspended sentences. Naturally, they lost their jobs, and given their actions were now public knowledge, they couldn't show their faces for a while. Tom was even disowned by other relatives, not just his mother. His future seemed destined for solitude. So it all worked out, but I was very giddy because so much had happened in the past few months. His mother stabilized and was discharged, and we started living as three again. I hate to cause you trouble again. I'm quite stubborn, aren't I? She joked, showing reluctance towards being cared for. What are you talking about? You shouldn't worry about such things. But you're divorced now. Doesn't that make me a stranger? You shouldn't waste your time on me. Legally, maybe, but the debt of gratitude we owe you remains unchanged. We're family till the end, right, Kelly? Yes, of course. So Grandma, rely on us. Touched by our words, she cried with gratitude. Thank you, I'm indeed blessed to have lived this long. Life went on peacefully after that, with no major incidents. His mother was stable, and Kelly successfully entered college. We hoped this pleasant life would last forever, but it wasn't to be. Years later, my mother-in-law's health declined further, and on a warm spring day she peacefully passed away. Her face was serene, making me hope I had repaid her kindness in some way. We conducted the funeral solemnly and bade her farewell without incident. Tom appeared at the funeral, but we didn't speak. If he's living safely somewhere, that's all that matters. While sorting through his mother's room, Kelly and I found a will she had secretly written. In it, she thanked us and gave us all her assets. Reading it, we quietly shed tears, grateful we could see her off properly. Though she's gone, we decided to live happily, also for her sake.
The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Mark, my husband of 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to the TV, ignoring my presence as usual. I sat there, lost in my thoughts, feeling the weight of years of unspoken grievances and suppressed anger. I had reached my limit. "Did you finish moving?" Mark's voice, tinged with his usual condescension, pierced the silence. I didn't look at him as I replied, "I'm leaving, Mark." My voice was calm, but inside a storm was raging. Mark scoffed, "Oh, really? And where will you go, Anna? You can't survive without me." His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. For too long I had endured his dismissive attitude and his mother's incessant meddling. It was time to reclaim my life. "I'll manage," I said, standing up. I felt empowered despite the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead. His mother, who had been living with us for the past year, walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw my packed bags. "Running away, are we?" she sneered. "I knew you didn't have the spine to handle this family." Ignoring her, I grabbed my bags and headed towards the door. Mark didn't move to stop me. Instead, he called out, "You'll be back. You need us." As I stepped out of the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The cool evening breeze felt like a balm to my suffocated soul. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. For 30 years, I had played the dutiful wife to Mark, a man who saw me more as a convenience than a partner. Our son Alex was the only light in my life, but even he couldn't fill the growing void in my heart. Mark's mother, with her constant criticisms and manipulations, only added to the toxicity of our home. I found a small apartment, modest but peaceful. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and think without judgment. In the following days, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages from Mark and his mother. They fluctuated between pleading and threats, but I was done listening. My coworkers at the library, where I had worked part-time for years, were supportive. They had seen the changes in me, the gradual loss of my spirit. Now, they witnessed my rebirth. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, my phone rang. It was Alex. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "I am, Alex. Better than I've been in years," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Dad and Grandma, they're not taking it well. Dad's been drinking, and Grandma won't stop talking about how you've abandoned them." A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it away. "They'll manage, Alex. They need to learn to respect others." Alex was silent for a moment. "I'm glad you're finally thinking about yourself, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." As I hung up the phone, I realized this was just the beginning. Mark and his mother had underestimated me for years. It was time to show them that I was no longer the woman they thought they could control. My journey of self-discovery and revenge had just begun. In my small apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I had taken with me, I reflected on the past 30 years with Mark. Our marriage, once filled with promise, had slowly disintegrated into a shadow of what it could have been. It all started blissfully. Mark was charming and attentive, and we were young, full of dreams. But as the years passed, the charm faded, revealing a man more interested in his own needs than those of his family. When Alex was born, I thought it would bring us closer, but it only highlighted our differences. Mark's idea of parenting was providing financially, leaving the emotional nurturing to me. His mother, Eleanor, always hovered in the background, her criticism of my parenting a constant drone. "Anna, you're coddling the boy too much," Eleanor would say. "Mark never needed all this fuss." I endured her jibes, focusing on Alex, who grew up to be a thoughtful and independent young man, despite the tension at home. The turning point came when Eleanor moved in with us. Mark didn't even discuss it with me. I just came home one day to find her bags in the hallway. "My house is too lonely," she had said, a manipulative glint in her eye. Living with Eleanor was suffocating. She criticized everything from my cooking to the way I dressed. "Mark could have done so much better," she would often say within my earshot. But what truly broke me was discovering Mark's betrayal. I stumbled upon bank statements one day, revealing large withdrawals from our joint account, money used to fund Eleanor's gambling habit and Mark's secret indulgences. Confronting them led to heated arguments, with Mark always siding with his mother. "She's my mother, Anna. She needs this to cope with her loneliness," he would argue, dismissive of my concerns. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between them, plotting to take control of the finances completely, reducing me to nothing but an occupant in their house. I knew then that I couldn't live in that shadow any longer. The day I left, I promised myself that they would one day understand the pain they had caused. My plan was simple yet effective. I would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their finances. I started by legally separating our finances, a move that shocked Mark. "What do you think you're doing?" he had yelled over the phone. "Protecting myself, something I should have done years ago." I replied, my voice calm but firm. Eleanor's reaction was even more dramatic. "You ungrateful wretch! After everything we've done for you," she screeched when she found out. But I was unmoved. The years of submission were over. I was playing by my own rules now, and this was just the beginning of their karma. The weeks following my financial independence were tumultuous. Mark and Eleanor were furious, their true natures fully exposed in their anger. I received countless calls, each more venomous than the last. "You think you're clever, Anna?" Mark hissed during one call. "You're nothing without me. You'll come crawling back." "I won't, Mark. I'm done being your puppet," I replied, my newfound strength bolstering my words. Eleanor was even more vitriolic. "You'll regret this, Anna. You've ruined our family." "There was no family to ruin, Eleanor. It was an illusion," I shot back. Despite their threats, I felt liberated. The fear that once controlled me had evaporated, replaced by a resolute desire for justice. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I started by reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, sharing my story. The truth about Mark and Eleanor's manipulations and financial deceit quickly spread, tarnishing their reputations. Mark, who prided himself on his social standing, was appalled. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded during a rare face-to-face encounter. "You did this to yourself," I replied calmly. "I'm just shedding light on it." Eleanor, faced with the community's judgment, was equally distraught. "You've turned everyone against us. This is war, Anna." But I was no longer intimidated by her. "No, Eleanor, this is justice." I watched as their world crumbled. Mark's friends began to distance themselves, wary of his tarnished image. Eleanor's social circle, once a source of her pride, dwindled as the truth about her gambling and manipulation spread. But I didn't stop there. I knew their financial instability was their weakest point. With the help of a lawyer, I began the process of claiming my share of our joint assets, ensuring that Eleanor's gambling debts were exposed and Mark's mismanagement of our finances was brought to light. The court proceedings were grueling, but I stood my ground. Mark and Eleanor's attempts to discredit me fell flat, their lies and deceit no match for the truth. As the judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant portion of our assets, I saw the defeat in Mark and Eleanor's eyes. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. "You've destroyed us, Anna," Mark said, a shadow of his former arrogant self. "No, Mark, you destroyed us long ago. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I looked forward to the future, free from the chains of my past. Mark and Eleanor's downfall was the first step in my journey of reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind. With my rightful share of the assets, I began building a life free from Mark and Eleanor's shadow. Their reactions, however, were a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this to us, Anna," Mark exclaimed over the phone one evening, his voice laced with desperation. "I've done nothing but take back what's mine," I replied firmly. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me." Eleanor's response was more underhanded. She tried to rally family members against me, painting herself as a victim. But her attempts were futile. The truth about her had spread too far. "Anna, you're tearing this family apart," she accused during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "This family was broken long before I left," I countered, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I relished the freedom of living on my own terms. I changed my phone number, cutting off their direct line of harassment. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others who had faced similar struggles. But my quest for justice wasn't over. I learned that Eleanor was planning to contest the court's decision, still clinging to the hope of reclaiming the money for her gambling habits. "You won't get away with this, Anna. I'll make sure of it," she threatened in a message relayed through a relative. In response, I fortified my legal defenses, prepared to counter any move she made. I was no longer the woman who shied away from confrontation. I was a fighter, standing up for what was rightfully mine. Mark, meanwhile, was crumbling under the pressure. His once pristine image was now tarnished, and his career suffered as a result. The friends and connections he valued so much were now distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with a man caught in scandal. "You've ruined me, Anna. he lamented during a rare moment of reflection. You ruined yourself, Mark. I just exposed the truth, I replied. As the weeks turned into months, I watched as their once secure world disintegrated. Eleanor's attempt to contest the court's decision failed miserably, leaving her financially and socially bankrupt. Mark's career continued its downward spiral, his reputation irreparably damaged. But despite their downfall, I felt no joy in their suffering. It was a necessary step in my journey, but it was not the end. I had reclaimed my independence and my dignity, but I was still healing from years of neglect and emotional abuse. As I continued to rebuild my life, I focused on finding peace and happiness within myself. I had emerged from the shadows of my past, stronger and more resilient. My story was not one of revenge, but of emancipation, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Several months had passed since the court's decision, and the ripples of my actions were still felt. Mark and Eleanor, now estranged from most of their acquaintances, were living a shadow of their former lives. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Alex. He looked troubled, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. Mom, I just came from seeing Dad and Grandma, he began, his voice heavy. They're not doing well. I offered him a seat and a warm cup of tea. Tell me what happened, Alex. He sighed deeply before continuing. Dad's been let go from his job, his drinking, it's gotten worse. And Grandma, she's lost everything to gambling. They're selling the house. I listened, my heart aching for Alex. Despite everything, they were still his family. Mom, did we go too far? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex, we stood up for what's right. They made their choices, I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. The news of their misfortune didn't bring me joy. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the consequences of a life lived without integrity and respect for others. The following weeks were filled with whispers and rumors. Mark and Eleanor's house, once a symbol of their success, was now on the market. Their fall from grace was complete. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Mark had tried to find work, but his reputation preceded him. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circles, her gambling addiction now public knowledge. One evening, while I was out for a walk, I saw Mark. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his posture slumped, his eyes hollow. Our paths crossed, and for a moment we stood there in silence. Anna, he began, his voice cracking. There's nothing to say, Mark, I interrupted. You chose your path. He nodded slowly, a resigned look in his eyes. I never thought it would come to this, he murmured. As I walked away, leaving Mark behind, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once held so much power over me was now just a stranger with a broken past. Eleanor, too, faded into obscurity. Her once lively demeanor was now subdued, the realities of her actions finally catching up to her. As the chapter of Mark and Eleanor closed, I realized that my journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and finding peace. I had stood up to my oppressors, not for vengeance, but for justice and self-respect. The experience had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I continued to build my new life, I did so with a newfound strength and a heart ready to embrace the future. Months turned into a year since the upheaval of my life began. In this time, my journey of self-reinvention continued, with each day bringing new strengths and realizations. The downfall of Mark and Eleanor was not my endgame. It was merely a byproduct of my pursuit for justice and respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat in my cozy living room, the warm sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting on the changes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Alex. Mom, I wanted to tell you something, Alex said, his voice brimming with excitement. Sarah and I are getting married, and we'd love for you to help us with the planning. Joy surged through me. That's wonderful news, Alex. Of course, I'd love to help. Our conversation was filled with laughter and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the calls filled with distress and despair from the past. A few days later, while out for my regular walk, I encountered Eleanor. She seemed smaller, diminished somehow. Our eyes met, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret perhaps, or realization in hers. Anna, she began, her voice quivering. I'm sorry. The apology, unexpected and late, caught me off guard. Eleanor, your actions brought you here. I hope you find some peace. As I walked away, Leaving Eleanor standing alone, I realized the full extent of my transformation. I no longer harbored anger or resentment. I had moved beyond the need for revenge. The wedding planning with Alex and Sarah was a joyful affair. It was during these moments, surrounded by love and hope, that I truly appreciated the beauty of moving forward. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and tears of joy. Watching Alex and Sarah, so full of love and promise, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, we had emerged stronger. In my toast, I said, "Life brings many challenges, but it's how we face them that defines us." Today, we celebrate love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the happy faces, feeling content. I had not only survived, I had thrived. In the years that followed, Mark and Eleanor remained distant memories. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved away, each carrying their own burdens. My life, once overshadowed by their presence, was now my own. I found fulfillment in my work, joy in my role as a mother and friend, and peace in my solitary moments. As I sat in my garden one sunny afternoon watching the flowers bloom, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. My journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it led me to a place of contentment and strength. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own life, and in this new chapter I found happiness, peace, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away.